So it's our third and final part of lesson 1. We've created the .NET Core MVC web application. We've used IIS Express to get it running in our browser. And we've made a couple little changes. We changed some content. Sure what happened to my server. I'll just make sure I start it again. Odd. Oops. So we changed some content on the homepage and we changed the title in our shared layout. So what we want to do now is make a new page. So first thing, I know you're thinking, well, we should make a view. We're actually going to modify the home controller first. So inside our home controller, we want to make a new method in here. And David, we'll talk about some of the code that's in here. So we're going to make a new method that will load at home/about. So our method's going to be public. Almost all the methods we make will be public. And if you notice our index and privacy methods that Visual Studio pre-built for us, they return this interface called iActionResult. I know this is new. We'll talk about what this is in a minute. So we're going to use iActionResult. And the code hinting here in Visual Studio is great. I can just press Enter or Tab. And I'm going to call my method about. So what is this iActionResult interface? Visual Studio gives us a little description, not that clear. It defines a contract that represents the result of an action method. So that's very vague in general. So let's think about this more specifically. When we call a method in a controller, the controller could do several things. What kinds of things could happen when we call a method in a controller? We've already got one example here. What happens in our index and privacy methods when these get called? What do they do? Yeah, it could return a view called about. Yeah, they return pages. So probably 95% of the time, 99% of the time we're building MVC web applications, almost all the time we're going to return a view. That's the most common. But we could return something other than a view or a web page. What else might we return? Okay, we could return just, some kind of component, like some data. So that might be oftentimes in JSON format. What else might we return? We could return a view. We could return JSON. Usually, so I'll make a note here. iActionResult usually returns a view, but could also return make this a multi-line comment. Yep. We could return, for example, an HTTP status code like 404 or 401, which is unauthorized, right? So we could return an unauthorized response if the user is trying to access something that they aren't allowed to. Yeah, so status code and error. We can also return a file, like a PDF to download. or a zip file. We could also return a redirect. So like after someone logs in, we could then call a different method. We could send them somewhere else in the application or to an error page. So iActionResult is just kind of like this. It's like a wrapper. It's a generic class, some kind of result. Usually it returns a view, a web page. But we could also use iActionResult to send back something else. And these would be the common things. So we've got this red line, Visual Studio's complaining here. So if I put the mouse over it, we've got this error here because it says your method doesn't return anything. This method is supposed to return some sort of result. But right now, there is no return statement. So how do we fix this? What do I need to add on line 36 to make the error go away? Yeah, we want to return. So what do we want to return in this case? Thank you. We want to return just like exact same code we have up here and here. When we make a URL request to /home/about, we want it to load the about view. Okay, so here's our method. So let's try this out. I'll save my file. And now I want to try my URL /home/about in the browser, see what happens. So I'll go to /about. And now I get this. What does this error mean? And why did it happen? This behavior is actually expected. So it called our method. So why do we have an error? That's right. The view about doesn't exist. The server tried all of these paths, views, home, and about, couldn't find it. Then it tried views shared about, couldn't find it. Then pages shared about, couldn't find it. So it crashes. So what do we need to do to fix this? You got it, Chris and Too Sharp. We need to create a view called about. So there's two ways of doing this. There's a bit of a shortcut, and then there's an alternate. I'll show you both ways. The easiest way, if I just right-click my method name, I can choose Add View. Now it gives me a couple of options. For today, I just want this first one, Razor View Empty. We'll use the other kinds of Razor views later. We don't need to worry about them for today. So we're going to pick an empty view, and I just click Add. And I'm going to call it about.cs.html. So the name of the view is going to match the method name in the controller. And we'll talk about the naming conventions in a minute because it's important. So I'll click Add. And if I look in my Solution Explorer, see where it added it. It automatically put the file under Views and Home. So it puts it in the right folder. It gives me some server-side code at the top. I'm just going to delete it. I don't need any of that. And I'll just put on an H1 and a paragraph tag. It's not really important what content's here. You can put any HTML you like in here. And now when I go back to my browser, it's automatically reloaded. And now we've got our page being displayed. So creating a new page is a two-part process. First, we create a method in the controller with the name we want, and that method returns a view. And then we have to build the view file. Okay, so it's a two-part process because we have the separation of concerns. The URLs are handled by our controller, by our logic file. And our controller decides what to do, in this case, load the view. Now I want to show you a couple things about the naming conventions because it's important. A few things to note when we're working with .NET MVC. The first one you'll notice is that Microsoft uses Pascal case for naming. So that it's like camel case, except the first word is also capitalized. So if I change my about method to be all lowercase, you'll notice Visual Studio highlights it in gray and puts this border around it, and it gives me a warning. It says this is a naming violation. These words should begin with uppercase. So if I click this fix, it renames it and puts a capital letter back. So whenever we make methods or views, whenever we name files, they should always be used Pascal case. So the first letter is a capital. This has been the Microsoft convention forever, for decades. In our browser, however, the URLs are actually not case sensitive. They were when we were working with PHP and Apache. So if I do home/about all lowercase, no problem. Web server can interpret that URL. So the browser, the URLs are not case sensitive. But our method names and view names should always start with capital letters. Now, what happens if the method name and the view name are not the same? We see that it works. If I call my method about, and I call my view with about, works fine. You don't have to make this change, but I'm going to show you what happens if I give my view a different name. So I'm just going to rename it for a minute. Right-click my view, and I'm going to call the view about-us. You don't have to change yours, but I've changed it to about us. And now you notice we get the error again. The about method automatically looks for a view called about. And if that view doesn't exist, we get this view not found error that we had before. So is it possible to make this work? To call my method one thing, call the view something else, but still have the right view load? It's possible, not advisable. So if I wanted to do it this way, down here on line 36, where I load my view, I would have to specify the name in quotes as a string. So even though the method is called about us, I'm not going to keep the code like this. I'm just showing you how the naming works. My method is about, but my view is about-us. If I save this change, my page should load again. This isn't recommended. The best practice is your view name should always match your method names exactly. But if for some reason you can't match them or you don't want to, you will need to specify which view is supposed to load. I'm going to undo that because it's much better and recommended follow the conventions. I'll put it back to about. Okay, two more quick things we want to do with this, and then we will call it a day. Any questions so far about creating the method, returning the view, and then creating the view file? Trying to keep it simple for today. Just do the basics. I don't want to confuse you. How are we doing so far? Okay. So we want to do two more things with our about page. Right now, the only way to get here is to actually type this URL directly in our browser, right? If we navigate around our little site, there's no indication that the about page even exists. So we want to add a link to this page in our site header. So no matter where we are, we have the ability to go to the about page. So which file do we need to change if we want to modify the navigation bar? Chris, you already found this file earlier. Thanks, Mike. So we're going to go back to our views shared _ layout. So we already opened it and we modified line 14. So here's our nav bar. And again, if your file isn't open, you can find it under views shared _ layout. So we've got two links here already. We've got the home link and we've got the privacy link. So we're going to create a third link beside privacy. But you'll notice these two links we've already got, they look a little bit different. What do you notice? What's different about this from a regular HTML anchor tag that we're all familiar with? A few things that are different. So I've highlighted line 22 in blue. It will be line 22 on your screen as well in your project. What do you notice that's different from the kind of links? Yeah, we've got these ASP elements. The ASP area is empty. We don't even need those. So we're just going to ignore that. So what do you suppose this means? ASP controller home, ASP action index, or ASP controller home, ASP action privacy. Notice there's no href property. We've got these instead. How come we have these instead of, yeah, Felix, it works similar to href. In fact, at runtime, so this is actually server-side code. If we view the source in the browser, right, here are the links. So we actually do, at runtime, get href tags. So we could create the links like this. How come? Why do you suppose they're formatted this way instead? They're kind of equivalent. How come these have got ASP controller and ASP action? Why don't they just have href? You got it, David. We're being intentional that our site is using MVC. So these links, we're not simply linking to a file like you would do with an HTML site or we did in PHP. We're being very intentional that this link, rather than just linking to a page, it actually calls a specific method or action of a particular controller. So we're just being very intentional that we're using MVC. Do we have to use this structure for links? No, we don't, but that's kind of the common practice when we're working in MVC. So we're going to create one more link, and we're going to use these ASP controller and action attributes to point it to the home controller and the about method. So I'm going to add a new set of LI tags. on line 27. So after the privacy link, I'm going to add a new li tag with the same class and a new anchor tag with navlink text dark. The ASP area we don't really need. That's only for breaking up large applications into different areas. But I want the ASP controller to be home. And what should our ASP action be for our third link? Which method do we want to call? Yes, it should be. Good catch, David. Thank you. It's nav item. So what's the action that this new link is going to call? Which method? Thank you. We want to call the new about method that we wrote in our controller. And then the text of our link will also say about. Okay, so the code highlighted on my screen, lines 27, 28, 29, this is our new link. So we're taking the nav bar that Visual Studio built for us, and we're starting to customize it with the links that we need. So save your file, and when you go back to your browser, our new link is here. So we can still go to home, privacy, but now no matter where we are, we can go to our about page. So you can probably start to see how this framework and all these tools let us be really productive really quickly. All we have to do is create a project template and we have a working site. Even if we just don't want to use a database, even to make a static HTML site, we can still use this MVC template. We just make a whole bunch of methods with a whole bunch of views. And then we can customize our CSS, customize our layout in any way we want to. But this gives us a great starting point to get an application up and running really quickly. We're going to do one last simple task with this. So right now our site is totally static. We're not going to work with the database today. That's far too much to get into for week one. So we've created a new method, a new view, a new link in the nav bar. Tushar, great question. Let's take it out and see. For today, so if I take out the ASP controller, does it still work? Excellent question. So I go home, privacy. Yes, it still goes here. So how come? Same on this link. Notice my link to home or lesson 1. How does it know to call the index method of the home controller? It's a good point you raised, Tushar. It actually does work in this case. I'll show you why. In Solution Explorer, we have this startup file that I mentioned. I showed it to you briefly, but we didn't make any changes. Down at the bottom, you'll notice this. app.use endpoints map controller root. So the default controller name is home. And the default action name is index. So if no action or method is specified, the index method is called. And if no controller is specified, it automatically uses the home controller. So that's why when we click home, it doesn't actually say /home/index because those are the default options. So we could change those, but we typically won't. So that's an excellent question. So that ASP controller, it's optional, but I tend to leave it in, like I said, to be very explicit and intentional about what we're doing. Does that make sense, Tushar? Does that answer your question? Excellent, very good question. Okay, we're going to do one last simple thing. So we've created this static page. I want to show you a very simple way that we can pass some data from the controller. When we load the view, we want to pass, let's just say we want to pass a message to the view, and we want to print it out. So we might use this to show an error message or confirmation, some kind of logic we process in the controller that when we load the view, we want to display. So I'm going to go back to my controller. And before we return the view, we're going to use the ViewBag container object to pass a simple message to be displayed in the view. So the ViewBag is just this kind of empty container where we can pass simple data and then render it in the view. So I'll say ViewBag dot, and now I can just define a variable. I'll say current time equals, and we'll use Microsoft's date time library to generate a timestamp. Tell us what's the current date, what's the current time. So Microsoft has a date time library, and in there, there's a method called now. It's a date time object that's set to the current date and time on this computer, expressed as local time. So I'm just going to add this line. This is the final thing we're going to do today. I'm going to add this line before we load the view. We're going to get the current date and time. We're going to store it in the ViewBag. We're going to create this variable called current time. I'll save that change. And then I want to go back to the About view, and we want to display this current time value. So every time the page loads, it's going to show the current date and time. I'm going to go back to my About view. We're going to write one line of code. So if I want to output a server-side value, all I need is the @ symbol. And then I can display this variable. So I don't need closing tags. I don't need to use an echo or print statement. I can just inject any server-side variable right into my HTML. So our syntax is much cleaner when we're working with ASP.NET than it is when we're working with PHP. So now shows current date and time. If I refresh, every time I refresh, the time updates. So the ViewBag is a simple way to send some information that we determine in the controller. We can send it to the view for display. I will put today's code up on GitHub. You can see, I will just show you. You don't have to worry about getting it on GitHub today. We'll go over this another day, but I'll show you how well this integrates into Visual Studio. If I go to Git and Git changes, I can just say create Git repository. Now I'm already logged into my GitHub account. And I can just click create and push. And it's going to make a new repository. It's going to push for me. I didn't have to write any code. Basically just one click. go back to GitHub. So if you need any of today's code, there it is. Because it's so nicely integrated into Visual Studio. All the code we did today. So here's our controller. So here's our about method with our ViewBag. And here's the about view that we made. So before next week, what do you need to do? Make sure you complete the Academic Integrity Pledge if you haven't already. If you're watching this video, then you want to be following along and creating this first project with the about method and view. And then you've got your first quiz. You will find that on Blackboard in the week 2 folder. That quiz will be available at 2 o'clock today. It's due next Wednesday at 5 p.m. I will upload the videos when WebEx is finished converting those to MP4s. Are there any questions from anybody before we break for the week? If you have no questions, then I hope you all have a great week. Yes, I really like that as well, Dave. Definitely the warm fuzzies. So I hope you like kind of this first taste of Visual Studio and MVC and .NET. I think you're really going to enjoy working with it and seeing what we can do. Okay, Felix, if you find it's harder, yeah. And some people do find it harder, but much more powerful. And it will get easier the more familiar we get. So the more you work with it, the easier you're going to find it. All right, folks, so that's all for this week. Make sure you complete the, that's great, Mike. I'm glad to hear that. Make sure you complete the Academic Integrity Pledge and your week 1 quiz. And I'll see you all next Thursday. Have a great weekend and a good start to your next week. And I'll see you next Thursday. Have a good week, everybody.
Thank you. Good one,
Thanks
Rich.
for joining.
Bye.
Bye.